He repaired her broken arm. Now she shadows him everywhere. The storm outside the citadel was relentless, a swirling tempest that battered the basalt towers and lashed the barren plains with razor-edged rain. Within, the corridors gleamed with cold precision, seamless onyx floors, walls veined with glowing conduits, a monument to the arrogance of the Varen commander. Mason, his matte armor blending with the shadows, moved with calculated intent. His objective sounded simple: extract the subject called Lyra and vanish. He knew better. Nothing was ever simple when it mattered. Lightning flashed, illuminating the vaulting ceilings. Every step Mason took was measured, a silent pact with the darkness. He pressed his back to a cold wall, the distant thrum of the citadel's core reverberating through his boots. Patrols marched past, their exosuits whispering threats, but Mason was nothing more than a passing shadow, unseen, untouchable. He reached the final security field, a shimmering haze of blue static, alive with crackling energy. He crouched, withdrawing a slim tool from his belt. With deft fingers, he slipped a probe into the access port. The field flickered, its hum dropping for a heartbeat. Mason slid through, the air tingling, raising goosebumps along his neck. He pressed himself against the smooth wall beside a round iris door, heart steady, breathing measured. From within came the unmistakable sounds of suffering, a mechanical whine, a hiss, a sharp gasp of pain, abruptly stifled. Risking a glance through the reinforced glass, Mason surveyed the laboratory. It was a sterile amphitheater, harshly lit, every surface gleaming white, so clean it almost hurt to look at. At the center, strapped to a surgical table, was his target, Syrah. She was unlike any captive he'd seen. Her skin shimmered with iridescent blue scales, high cheekbones catching the sterile light, silver eyes bright with something fierce and unbroken. Technicians in white exosuits hovered over her, their movements brisk, clinical. At her shoulder, where flesh met alien metal, they worked, a tangle of luminous filaments and biomechanical actuators connecting her arm to a complex harness. The lead scientist, expression hidden behind a visor, drove a probe into her joint. Syrah's body arched, breath hissing through clenched teeth. Mason's jaw tightened. Through the glass, their gazes locked. Syrah's stare was ice and fire, unblinking, proud. She did not plead. Instead, her chin lifted, daring him to act. Mason felt the familiar burn of anger. He drew his sidearm, thumbed off the safety and moved. The iris door slid open with a whisper. Mason slipped inside, every motion ghost silent. One suppressed shot, a soft foot, and the lead scientist crumpled, surprise frozen on his face. Another technician lunged for an alarm. Mason dropped him with a nerve shot, sending the man to the floor in a spasm. The third technician turned, mouth open to shout, but Mason was already on him, arms snaking around his throat. In moments the lab fell silent, the only sound Syrah's ragged breaths and the mechanical drone of the machines. Mason kept his weapon raised as he approached. Syrah watched him, muscles tense beneath her scales, ready to lash out. He hesitated only a second, then set his gun aside and knelt by her side, eyes sweeping her wound. Shredded filaments, leaking blue fluid, seized actuators where metal met flesh. Mason retrieved his toolkit and glanced at her face. "This will hurt," he said, voice gentler than his armored frame would suggest. Syrah's jaw clenched, but she gave a single curt nod. He worked quickly, yet with an unhurried precision, each movement deliberate. He reached for the filaments, pausing as Syrah's hand twitched in warning. "Easy," he murmured. "I'm here to help." She watched him, silver eyes wary, but allowed him to proceed. Mason's hands moved with the certainty of experience. Extracting a fragment of broken probe, he set to reconnecting the delicate filaments. Blue fluid welled up and he staunched it, sealing the wound with a nanopatch. The mechanical harness resisted, but he coaxed it into alignment, fingers brushing the cool, scaled skin at her shoulder. She arched in pain, a tremor passing through her frame, but made no sound. Her pride held her silent. As Mason worked, something shifted in her expression. Suspicion flickered, then softened, curiosity gleaming through the pain. He completed the final splice, and a pulse of light ran beneath her skin. Syrah flexed her arm, watching the ripples chase across her scales. Crude, but functional. A shriek of alarm sliced through the lab, time's cruel reminder. Red strobes bathed the white chamber in warning. Mason slid his blade across her restraints. The band snapped, clattering to the floor. Syrah rolled off the table in a fluid motion, coiled and ready, every inch the predator. Mason tensed, expecting an attack, but she only regarded him, head tilted, waiting. "Can you move?" he asked, checking the corridor with a glance. "If you lead," she replied, her voice low and melodic, both uncertain and resolute. The doors burst open, and Varen guards surged in, weapons raised. Mason fired, moving with lethal economy. Syrah became a blur of blue and silver, her strikes silent, precise, lethal. She dropped a guard with a spinning kick, then tore a rifle from another's hands, using it to sweep aside a third. Together they fought, each filling the other's gaps, a seamless rhythm forged in the heat of violence. Side by side, they plunged into the lower levels, alarms echoing after them. The corridors narrowed, twisting into the bowels of the citadel. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes, cloaking them in shifting clouds. Mason pressed a button on his wrist. His cloak shimmered, rendering him near invisible. Syrah paused, watching him. Then her scales rippled, colors darkening, body fading into the shadows. She vaulted silently above, perched on a maintenance beam, her eyes glinting in the gloom. Mason ducked into a side alcove, tending a graze on his arm. He checked his gear, senses alert for pursuit. Footsteps faded, silence fell. Syrah dropped down beside him, soundless as mist. She studied his arm, noting the blood that seeped from beneath the armor. Mason glanced at her own wound, blue fluid staining her side. "You're injured," he observed. She didn't reply, but when he gestured, she moved closer, suspicion edged with a new, tentative trust. Mason cleaned the wound at her shoulder, his fingers lingering on her cool, scaled skin, feeling her breath quicken. A charged silence coiled between them, her nearness unsettling, magnetic. For a heartbeat, he let his hand remain. Then, reluctantly, he pulled away, the urgency of escape pressing in from all sides. Mason needed answers. At a secure terminal in the bowels of the citadel, he tapped a code with trembling fingers, his armor still streaked with Syrah's blue blood. The hololink shimmered to life, and his handler's face appeared, cold, impassive, every syllable sharpened by authority. "Subject extracted. Field repairs underway," Mason reported, forcing calm into his voice. The reply landed like a blade. "You weren't to extract. You were to observe the final phase and neutralize the site. She wasn't a captive." A chill ran through Mason's core, confusion and dread gnawing inside him. "Clarify," he demanded, voice dangerously low. The handler's eyes narrowed, lips curling in disdain. "The commander didn't imprison a weapon. He commissioned one. The procedure you witnessed wasn't torture, it was imprinting. A loyalty protocol, not punishment." The words echoed, hollow and damning. "You didn't save her. You interrupted her programming, and by attempting repairs, you completed the process. The neural link is now bound to you. She will follow your orders, not out of gratitude, but because you are her anchor." For a moment, Mason's thoughts splintered. He looked at Syrah, who waited a few paces behind, watching him with those liquid silver eyes. Her presence felt suddenly enormous, dangerous, and fragile at once. He understood now. The way she moved to his side, the flicker of recognition, the way her gaze lingered on him alone. Sira sensed the shift in his bearing, the tremor of uncertainty he could not hide. She stepped forward, her movements fluid and decisive, and slipped her arm around his shoulders. It was more than comfort. It was a declaration, a protective, claiming gesture that said, "Mine." The handler's voice cut through the moment. "New directive. Eliminate her. Now." Mason's answer was immediate, the word ripped from somewhere primal. "No." Silence crackled across the link, disbelief radiating from the handler's eyes. Mason could almost hear the unseen protocols recalibrating, the silent alarms that would mark him as a traitor. "You have made your choice," the handler intoned. "You are now a fugitive. Both sides will hunt you." The transmission went dead. Mason's reflection lingered for an instant in the fading hollow, haunted, resolved. He turned to Sira, desperation and clarity mingling in his voice. He spoke in simple words, shaping meaning with his hands as he went. "No more masters," he said, making a slashing motion through the air. "We are alone." He pointed to himself, then her, and mimed an explosion. "They want you destroyed." She studied him, her expression unreadable, then stepped closer, taking his hand with unexpected gentleness. She pressed his palm to her chest, just above where the blue scales glimmered over her heart. "You lead now," she said, her voice low and absolute. In that moment, everything shifted. The distance between them dissolved, not handler and asset, not rescuer and rescued, but equals against a world arrayed to destroy them. Mason let his hand linger on her chest, feeling the powerful thrum of her hybrid heart. His thumb brushed over the iridescent scales, each one warm and alive. He lifted his other hand, touching her cheek, not clinically, but with reverence. Sira leaned into his palm, her eyes closing. A low, resonant hum vibrated in her throat, a sound of satisfaction and surrender. Her silver eyes, once hard and cold, now softened, reflecting the flicker of hope. "Escape is impossible," Mason murmured, breaking the moment. "They'll hunt us." "Then we hunt them," Sira replied, certainty burning in her tone. Mason nodded, the old soldier rising in him. He pulled up a schematic of the fortress on the cracked terminal. "We need chaos," he said. "We hit their power nexus. Everything goes dark. In the confusion, we move." Sira's eyes glinted. She leaned over the display, her presence brushing close to him, her scent metallic and electric. With uncanny precision, she traced patrol routes and weak points, her fingertip leaving glowing blue trails on the hollow map. "Patrols here," she said, tapping 3 intersections. "Weakness here, vent shafts, power relays here. If you move now, you reach the nexus unseen." Mason's admiration grew with every word. "You know this place," he said quietly. "They built me here," Sira replied. "I remember every corridor." They moved out, slipping through steam-choked tunnels and darkened halls. The air vibrated with tension, alarms still echoing distantly above. In the lower levels, Sira moved like a streak of blue fire, her form blurring against the shadows. Mason matched her pace, every sense tuned to the hunt. 2 guards rounded a corner, exosuit lights cutting through the gloom. Sira lunged, silent and lethal. Her hand snapped a neck, her foot swept the other's legs out from beneath him, and Mason finished the job with a silenced round. The bodies hit the ground almost as one. At the heart of the nexus, Mason set charges, silent, surgical, deadly. Sira watched his back, her body poised to strike. He keyed the detonator, and they melted into darkness, retreating just as the charges blew. A thunderous explosion rocked the sector, plunging the fortress into chaos. Lights flickered, alarms howled, security doors slammed shut and reopened in confused sequence. In the confusion, Mason and Sira slipped away, pressed close in a shadowed alcove. They waited, breathless, alarms painting their faces in red flashes. Mason turned to Sierra, unable to tear his eyes from her. He reached up, brushing a stray lock of her hair from her face. Her lips parted, her breath warm on his cheek. The air between them was electric, an exquisite, dangerous stillness. Sierra's hand found his chest, resting over his heart. "I am not afraid," she whispered. "I am yours." Before he could answer, another team of guards thundered past. Mason seized the moment, leading Sierra through a series of access corridors, deeper into the scientific wing. They passed labs filled with shattered glass, flickering terminals, and the stench of burning circuits. At the end of one hall, Mason burst through the reinforced door of the chief scientist's lab, weapon drawn. The chief scientist, a thin, jittery man in a stained coat, looked up from his console, terror widening his eyes. "Tell me about the bond," Mason demanded, voice edged with violence. "Now!" The scientist's hands shook. "The bond? You don't understand. When you repaired her, you completed the integration, not just neural, but biological. The nanites, symbiotic." "Explain," Mason barked, stepping closer. "The nanites link you both," the scientist stammered. "Her loyalty protocol is hardwired to your neural signature. But it's more than that. Your vital systems are synchronized. If you die, she dies. If she is killed, your body will fail. It was supposed to ensure absolute control. Now you are bound. Inextricably." Mason's mind reeled, the enormity of it crashing over him. He looked at Sierra, searching for fear, for regret, but there was none. Instead, he saw fierce satisfaction, pride blazing in her silver eyes. She reached for him, the gesture unyielding. "To you, this is perfect loyalty?" he asked, voice raw. "Yes," Sierra answered, certainty radiating from her. "I am yours. You are mine." Something deep inside Mason broke, or perhaps finally healed. He crossed the space between them, seized her waist with rough hands, and kissed her, desperate and claiming. Sierra met him with equal hunger, her arms twining around his neck, pulling him closer. For a moment, alarms, science, and the world itself fell away. There was only the storm of their joined fates, the taste of freedom on her lips, and the knowledge that from now on they were bound, predator and weapon, hunted and hunter, together against the darkness. The commander's throne room was a cavern of black glass and flame, the seat itself a carved leviathan skull with horns arching into the firelit gloom. Mason and Sierra crashed through the scorched gates, breathless, bruised, their bodies marked by battle and resolve. Mason advanced first, sidearm drawn, movements honed and economical. Sierra followed, a living storm, blue scales gleaming, silver eyes alight with ferocity. Drones buzzed above, their red optics tracking every step. The commander rose from the monstrous throne, a giant swathed in power armor, the suit's servos hissing with each motion. A scarlet cape draped his shoulders, plasma gauntlets crackling. He fixed his gaze on Mason, voice amplified and cold. "You brought the traitor and the experiment. I expected more sense." Mason smirked, circling the throne's dais, eyes flicking to exposed conduits. "I suppose you'll have to settle for a reckoning." Sierra didn't wait for orders. She launched herself upward, twisting through the air as a cluster of drones shot after her. Blue light trailed in her wake, scales refracting every beam. She kicked off a support column, lashing out with her cybernetic arm and sending a drone spinning into the wall. Another shot a burst of plasma. Sierra dodged, rolling in midair, then ripped the weapon from its frame and hurled it into a cluster, sending sparks raining down. Mason darted between columns, dodging the commander's first blow, a swing that crushed a plinth to powder. The force of it sent cracks spiderwebbing through the glass floor. Mason rolled, fired a round that pinged harmlessly off the armor's chest. The commander moved with terrifying strength, each step rumbling. "Coward!" the commander bellowed. "Face me!" Mason grinned, feinting left, drawing the commander into a charge. As the armored behemoth crashed past, Mason ducked, sliding behind the throne. He yanked a panel free, exposing the seething heart of the power core. Cables sparked and hissed. "You sure about that?" Mason called, fingers working fast. Above, Syrah spiraled through the drones, a blue streak among red lasers. Her arm pulsed, sending a magnetic surge into a drone's processor. It dropped, spinning, and she landed atop it, springing off as it exploded. Another drone clipped her shoulder, drawing a line of blue across her scales. She hissed, twisting in the air, and took two more out with a whip-like arc of her tail. On the ground, the commander roared and charged, aiming a gauntlet at Mason. Plasma spewed, but Mason dived behind the throne, using the massive skull for cover. He glanced up, caught Syrah's eye. She nodded, ready. Mason jammed a shock spike into the throne's core. Electricity arced, the whole seat trembling. "You built your empire on borrowed power," he taunted. The lights flickered, energy surging, the drones above glitching. Syrah seized the moment, slamming her fist into the nearest drone's core. All at once, the swarm collapsed, raining metal. She landed hard beside Mason, battered but smiling. Blood and oil streaked across her cheek. The commander staggered, his armor sparking, joints seizing. He lurched forward, slower now, eyes burning with hatred. "You think this ends with me?" Mason aimed his weapon, voice even. "No, it ends with us." The commander lunged, but the suit's power failed, sending him crashing to one knee. Syrah strode forward, lifting Mason with one arm, tucking him to her side, a shield, a statement. She stared the fallen giant down, silver eyes bright with certainty. "We are not yours," she said. "Never again." A hush fell. The throne room flickered in and out of darkness, flames guttering. For a long moment, there was only the sound of their breathing, the commander's labored rasp, and the distant collapse of the citadel. Mason drew a shaky breath, glancing up at Syrah. She looked down at him, her expression fierce and proud. "We're free," he murmured. Her arm tightened around his shoulders. "We are bound, by choice." They turned their backs on the shattered throne, moving together through halls ruined by their passage. No more alarms, only the hush that followed devastation. At the landing bay, Mason keyed his battered ship's hatch. Syrah watched him, silent, silver eyes never leaving his face. He hesitated, bloodied hand on the controls. "You still want this?" he asked, his voice rough with the weight of the moment. Syrah reached out, brushing his knuckles with hers. "I choose you, every time." He smiled, small, tired, but real. They boarded, the ship's old engines rumbling to life. Outside, the planet blazed, the fortress's spires crumbling behind them. Syrah watched the firelight fade, her posture regal, but her gaze soft as it rested on Mason. In the cockpit, their hands brushed over the console, a silent promise of the future they would fight for. 6 months slipped by, marked by fugitives' days and nights. Across the sector, whispers grew, of the shade and the siren, ghosts that haunted border worlds and outposts, vanishing as quickly as they appeared. In grimy dives, and at the edge of lawless systems, their names became legend. Some said they destroyed tyrants for gold, others for justice, others still for the thrill of survival. The drift bar on Oris 7 pulsed with neon and tension. Mason and Syrah sat in the corner, hoods drawn low, faces shadowed. Across from them, a desperate Rin pleaded, her hands trembling. "My kin, they took them, the mining syndicate. Please, I can pay half now, half after." Mason's jaw tightened. "Where?" "Refinery complex, North Quadrant. Guards everywhere." "I've tried everything." Syrah leaned forward, her silver gaze pinning the Rin. "We will bring them back." The Rin's hope flared. Mason slid a hand to Syrah's, anchoring her. "You know the drill," he murmured. Syrah's lips curled in anticipation. "I'll draw them away. You free the captives." The refinery was a fortress of steel and steam. Mason moved first, a ghost slipping through gaps in patrols, disabling alarms with practiced efficiency. Syrah melted into the rafters, her blue scales shimmering as she glided over molten pipes and catwalks. Together, they were a blur, never seen, only felt, the promise of ruin for those who would harm the innocent. They found the Rin's family, a cluster of frightened figures locked in a cell, hope flickering in their eyes. Mason worked the lock, whispering, "Stay close. Move when I say." Guards swarmed, boots pounding on steel. Syrah dropped from the shadows, silent and deadly, knocking two aside with swift, precise blows. Mason guided the family through the chaos, leading them along the maze of corridors. An alarm blared, and a heavy squad converged, cutting off their route. Laser sights swept the darkness, shouts echoing. Mason glanced at Syrah, giving a subtle hand sign, a code for attack now. She vanished, slipping into a narrow crawl space above. Seconds later she crashed down, her full weight collapsing the catwalk in a shower of sparks and shrieking metal. Debris rained down, guards scattering. A massive beam hurtled toward Mason. Syrah was there, intercepting it with her cybernetic arm, shielding Mason and the Rin family with her own body. Her eyes met his, burning with protective resolve. "Go!" she commanded. Mason nodded, ushering the family through the smoking breach, Syrah covering their retreat. They slipped out into the night, the refinery a chaos of alarms behind them. Mason looked back, saw Syrah silhouetted by fire and sparks, more myth than flesh. In the darkness, she moved to his side, her touch steady. The family was safe. And together, Mason and Syrah vanished once more into the shadows, legend following in their wake. Back on their ship, the Nomad, the echoes of chaos faded into the hum of the engines and the faint tick of cooling metal. Mason sat on the edge of the medbay cot, stripping away burned synth fabric to reveal a fresh plasma burn on his forearm. The wound pulsed with heat, angry and red, but he barely winced as he uncapped the antiseptic. Across the small cabin, Syrah stood before the utility sink, sluicing blood and ash from her scales. Blue iridescence shimmered under the flickering light, each motion both practical and strangely beautiful. When she finished, she toweled herself dry and crossed to him, footsteps nearly silent. Her fingers hovered just above his injury, trembling faintly. "You're hurt," she said, her voice low, each word brushed with concern and reproach. Mason looked up, meeting her gaze. Liquid silver eyes, fierce as always, but softer now with worry. He caught her hand, savoring the coolness of her touch against the fever of his skin. "Just a scratch," he murmured, his words laced with quiet affection. Her brow furrowed. "I should have protected you." He shook his head, thumb tracing the intricate pattern of her scales. "You did what I needed, Syrah. That was enough. More than enough." The tenderness in his voice surprised them both. She knelt beside him, their faces close. "You never flinch," she said, a hint of awe threading her tone. "Not from pain, not from me." He smiled faintly. 6 months on the run, I've learned to trust you." Syrah searched his face, reading truths in the lines and scars. She pressed his hand to her chest, above the steady beat of her hybrid heart. Her own hand moved to rest over his, anchoring him to her. "Before, I was function, not self. The commander gave orders. I obeyed. Now, I am." He felt the rhythm of her heart beneath his palm, strong, unyielding. "Do you remember your old life? The commander?" he asked, voice gentle, curious. Her answer was quiet, unflinching. "I remember being used, Remember pain, not choices. Now, I choose. She lifted her head, gaze unwavering. You, Mason. This life, my own. He stood, guiding her with a touch. Turning her so her back was to him, he took a damp cloth and began to clean the scales at the base of her neck, a place she could not reach. His touch was slow, deliberate, reverent. He worked in silence, tracing the delicate line where scales met skin, careful not to press too hard. Sira relaxed into him, her head tipping forward, her breath evening out. She pressed herself against his chest, her arms winding back around his waist. "No one has ever touched me like this," she whispered. Mason leaned closer, lips brushing the crown of her head. "No one's ever known you like this." They stood like that for a long time, a quiet tangle of limbs and breath and trust. The hush of the nomad enfolded them, the stars wheeling by outside the portholes. In that moment, the universe shrank to the two of them. No hunts, no war, no debts unpaid. Later, the ship's lights dimmed for night cycle. Mason settled into the cockpit, the controls under his hands more familiar than his own heartbeat. He watched the star lines drift by, the silence deep and peaceful. Sira joined him, her presence a steady warmth at his back. She slid her hands onto his shoulders, kneading tension from his muscles, her touch both comfort and shield. He let out a contented sigh. "Accounts are full. No contracts, no clients. We could disappear." Sira rested her chin on his shoulder, her voice a soft rumble. "Do you want that? To vanish?" He hesitated, staring out at the endless dark. "After so long running, I thought I did. Now, I don't know. Feels wrong to be idle, like we're waiting for a fight that hasn't come yet." A companionable silence stretched between them. The Nomad systems purred, navigation lights blinking steady green. Then, all at once, the quiet shattered. The console flashed red, a proximity alert, but subtler than an ordinary collision warning. Mason scanned the data, heart rate spiking. An encrypted message, coded in a cipher only he and his old handler used. He keyed in the decryption sequence, fingers moving by instinct. The words that appeared were chilling in their simplicity. Black Vault Kira. He froze, blood running cold. The Black Vault. He'd heard rumors. A shadow prison. A place where broken assets were erased, where failed experiments and disloyal operatives vanished. A final solution for problems like Sira. And now, someone wanted him to know. Sira leaned in, scanning the screen. Her scales prickled, tension rolling off her. "A trap," she said. He nodded. "Or a warning, or both." He met her eyes, searching for hesitation and finding none. She reached for his hand, squeezing it tight. "If they erase us, others will follow. We end it now." He searched her face, reading the resolve there. "This isn't just survival anymore, is it?" Her lips curled in a fierce smile. "It's justice." Mason looked at the navigation chart. Black Vault. Kira's coordinates blinked, a challenge in the void. He hesitated only a moment, then set the course. The Nomad's engines rumbled, shifting direction, slicing through the black toward their new target. Sira's scales shimmered in the cockpit's starlight, a silent vow. She moved to stand beside him, her hand on his shoulder, anchoring them both. They watched the stars stretch and blur as the Nomad accelerated, no longer prey, but hunters with a purpose. He glanced at her, voice low. "Whatever's waiting there. We face it together," she finished, certainty ringing in every word. As the ship hurtled into the darkness, the last pieces of their old selves fell away. Alone among the stars, nothing else mattered. Not the enemies behind them, nor the nightmares ahead. Mason and Sira, bound by choice and circumstance, became something more than fugitive and weapon. They became a force. Outside, the cosmos beckoned, cold and endless. Inside, the hush between them was full of promise and resolve. This time, they would not run. This time, they would strike. The approach to Black Vault Kira was silent, tension thick in the air. The Nomad threaded its way through the labyrinth of asteroids, every maneuver precise, the shields dialed down to ghost through the perimeter. Mason and Syrah barely spoke, communicating in looks, in the way their hands brushed at the controls. The facility appeared as a shadowed rift in the rock, a fortress built for erasure, not for life. Mason keyed the forged credentials into the comm. The docking AI responded with a string of numbers, the hangar doors yawning open. "We're in," he whispered. Syrah nodded, eyes narrowed and unblinking, the blue of her scales muted by the ship's emergency lighting. Inside, Black Vault Kira was a mausoleum. Steel corridors stretched out in angular webs, the walls veined with flickering red light. Every footstep echoed like a memory. They moved together, bodies close but not touching, their presence slipping through the blind spots of cameras and patrols. Mason disabled security feeds with quick flicks of his wrist, his mind mapping escape routes even as they advanced. Syrah watched for guards, reading the rhythm of their boots, the hiss of breath behind masks. Her movements were predatory, but softer now. Each action timed to Mason's without need for a word. They were more than a team. Their bond was instinct, a perfect circuit of trust and anticipation. They passed through galleries of locked doors, narrow observation windows giving glimpses of what the world wished forgotten. Broken weapons, scarred agents, failed experiments huddled on cold floors. The silence in those cells was absolute, broken only by the faint buzz of electrified bars. Mason paused at one window, the breath knocked from him. Inside, a grizzled man stared back, Sergeant Holland, his mentor from a lifetime ago. The man's eyes flickered with dull recognition. "Mason?" he croaked, the word barely a sound. Mason pressed his hand to the glass. "I'm here. Hold on." Syrah's face was unreadable, but her gaze lingered on the adjacent cell. There, hunched in shadow, were other Varen, her own kin. Their scales were faded, some mottled with old burns, eyes empty or wild. One lifted her head, recognition sparking. "Syrah?" she whispered, disbelief lacing the word. Syrah's fingers clenched. "I will come back for you," she promised, her voice iron. The deeper they moved, the more oppressive the air became. The horror of the place was overwhelming, a graveyard not of bodies, but of purpose, of hope. Mason's jaw was tight, his eyes burning. "We end this," he vowed. They reached the core of the facility, the control hub. It was a nest of terminals and monitors, feeds flickering with surveillance of every corridor, every cell. Mason slid into the main console, hands flying across the interface. Syrah stood guard at his back, every muscle taut, her eyes scanning for threats. "Looping cameras," Mason muttered. "Disabling auto turrets, unlocking cells." He paused, sweat beading his brow. "Here we go." The locks disengaged with a metallic clatter, echoing down the halls. Doors groaned open, prisoners spilling out in confused, stumbling groups. Alarms blared, bathing the hub in scarlet light. Syrah's voice was steady. "Guards coming, 3 on the left, 2 with stunners." Mason nodded, finishing his work. "Security feeds are ours for 5 minutes. After that, they'll notice." She stepped into the doorway as the first guard rounded the corner. Syrah moved with predatory grace, ducking a baton swing, her arm lashing out to shatter a mask. Mason fired a silenced round, dropping another. The rest hesitated, caught between training and sudden terror. Then the prisoners surged forward, old operatives, failed soldiers, Varen who had nothing left to lose. The guards were swept aside in a tide of rage and hope. "We have to get to the director," Mason said, voice tight. Syrah nodded, leading the way. They wove through chaos, freed prisoners arming themselves with scavenged gear, old alliances reigniting in the heat of rebellion. Mason caught sight of Sergeant Holland, the old man nodding to him, eyes alive for the first time in years. They burst into the director's office, a glass box overlooking the facility, consoles humming with unreadable data. The director stood at the far end, a thin man with hair slicked back, his uniform immaculate. He didn't flinch as Mason leveled a weapon at him, didn't even blink as Syrah stalked forward, claws extended. "So the broken tools come home to die," the director sneered. "You think this changes anything? You're nothing, discarded, obsolete." Syrah closed the distance in a heartbeat, her claws pressing to the pale skin of his throat. "You discarded us. We chose to return." Mason's voice was cold as steel. "We're not tools. Not anymore." The director sneered, eyes darting to the console. "You think you've won. The next generation's already in production. Your rebellion will be erased." He never finished. Syrah's claws tightened. Not enough to kill, just enough to silence. "Your words mean nothing. Your power ends here." Mason glanced at the freed prisoners spilling into the hall behind them. "He's yours," he said, stepping aside. Justice was not a word, but a collective, silent fury. The prisoners surged forward, dragging the director from his glass citadel. Mason and Syrah didn't watch. There was no satisfaction in vengeance, only necessity. They moved to the core, the heart of the facility, planting charges at the main energy conduits. Mason worked in silence, hands steady, Syrah watching his back. The alarms grew frantic, the facility shuddering as prisoners took control. As Mason finished arming the last detonator, Syrah leaned close, her breath warm against his ear. "Together," she whispered. "A promise, a challenge, and something more." He grinned, adrenaline and love mingling in his chest. "Always." They ran, the walls trembling as the countdown ticked away. The Nomad was waiting, engines already primed. Mason piloted them away, Syrah at his side, as Black Vault Kira erupted behind them, a blossom of fire blooming in the endless dark. They watched from orbit, the flames painting the cockpit in shifting gold. Mason turned to Syrah, drawing her into his arms. Their lips met, fierce and gentle all at once, the kiss a declaration, a celebration, and a release. The bond between them, once a chain, now felt like a lifeline, unbreakable and chosen. As the last echoes of the explosion faded, Mason pressed his forehead to hers, their hearts steady, one rhythm in the hush of the stars. Their legend grew. Across a dozen worlds, whispers of the shade and the siren spread, fugitives who destroyed the vault, freeing scores of lost souls. Their names became murmurs in the dark, carried in the breathless hush of 100 cantinas, etched into bounty lists and warning files. Mason and Syrah, never pausing, never repeating a pattern, always a step ahead. The price on their heads soared higher with every retold tale. Some said they were ghosts, others swore they were more myth than mortal. Yet beneath the myths, their lives settled into a rhythm. The Nomad's engines became their heartbeat, its narrow corridors and battered hull their only constant. Each job they took was for credits enough to disappear for a while, but they chose their targets. Corrupt syndicate treasuries, slaver convoys, tyrants who had grown fat on fear. They left chaos and hope in their wake, never lingering, never boasting. Sometimes they slipped in under new names, vanished before the ink could dry on a wanted poster. Between missions, in the hush of hyperspace or the hidden alcoves of asteroid ports, their days found quieter shape. Syrah was never far from Mason, her gaze always tracking him, her presence a steady anchor. Mason, for all his soldiers' caution, found his hand drawn to hers in idle moments, or brushing the scales at her wrist, the gesture both grounding and intimate. One night, as the Nomad drifted between suns, Mason prepared a simple meal in the ship's cramped galley. He moved with a grace born of repetition, slicing root vegetables, stirring a bubbling stew, the scent filling the small space. Syrah perched on the opposite bench, elbows on knees, eyes bright with fascination. The mechanics of cooking, fire and water, transformation, still seemed to her a quiet magic. She reached out, fingers tracing the old scar above Mason's brow. Her touch was gentle, reverent. "You saved me," she murmured, voice low. "You made me whole." Mason caught her hand, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "You saved me too, Syrah. Gave me something worth fighting for." Syrah's mouth quirked in a soft smile. "I was weapon and chain. Now I am more. With you, I am." They ate together, knees touching under the table. The meal was humble, but to Syrah it was a feast, every flavor new, every shared laugh a treasure. They spoke in half-whispers, laughter threading through confessions and memories. Mason told stories of his childhood under twin moons, of the night he learned to shoot, of the first time he saw the stars outside a prison cell. Syrah shared fragments, memories of the laboratory's cold light, of learning the shape of her own voice, of the first time she'd felt the warmth of Mason's hand. Later, as the nomad floated in the endless dark, Syrah curled beside him in the bunk. Her scales were cool silk against his skin, her arms enfolding them both. Mason held her close, feeling her breath sink to his own, the boundary between their lives blurred by choice and by the symbiosis in their blood. Outside, the stars wheeled in silence. The hunters came, sometimes alone, driven by greed or reputation, sometimes in squads funded by syndicates or governments. None returned. Mason and Syrah faced them as one. He, a shadow moving through airlocks and corridors, all tactics and foresight. She, blue fire and silver eyes, a vision of death and mercy. They never relished the killing, but neither did they hesitate. Their bond made them unpredictable, unstoppable, each feeling the other's intent like a current through their veins. On a mining moon, a trio of assassins found the nomad in a dockyard. Mason dispatched the first with a silent shot from the shadows. Syrah disarmed the second, scales flaring, claws pressed to a throat until the man sobbed surrender. The third fled into the dust, spreading rumors that only fanned the myth. On the run, they became more than fugitives. They became symbols of freedom, rebellion, and a love that was both curse and salvation. Across the sector, the lost and hunted whispered about the shade and the siren, and hope took root in places it had not lived for years. Their downtime was brief, precious. Syrah learned to dance in zero gravity, delighting in the way her body spun, scales catching the ship's scattered light. Mason read old stories aloud to her, tales of ancient heroes, of impossible quests, of love that endured the dark. She listened, head in his lap, fingers idly tracing the lines of his jaw. Sometimes, Mason would wake in the night, fear clutching his heart, fear that their bond, the nanites in their blood, was still a chain. But Syrah would sense it, even in sleep. She would draw him close, her breath steadying his, whispering, "I choose this, I choose you." And the fear would melt, replaced by a fierce gratitude. In a quiet hour, starlight spilled through the viewport, painting silver patterns across the nomad's battered floor. Syrah pressed her forehead to Mason's, her hands on his cheeks, her eyes searching his soul. "One rhythm," she whispered, their hearts beating as one. He answered with a kiss, slow, deep, as if the universe itself had paused to give them this breath. In that moment, the past and future disappeared. There was only the warmth between them, the unspoken promise that whatever came next, they would face it together. They would never be safe, never ordinary. But they no longer wanted safety or ordinary days. Together, they were unstoppable. Hunters now, not prey. Shade and Siren, leader and weapon, partners in the only battle that mattered, the fight to live, to love, and to choose their own path wherever it might lead. Our story ends here. Make sure you subscribe, press the like button, and tell us in the comments what stood out to you the most in this video. Your feedback means a lot to our team. You'll discover many more captivating stories on our channel. See you in the next one.